Hello and welcome to the Angelati studio here at Itron Utility Week. I'm now joined by Greg Richards, Itron VP of DevOps. Greg, firstly, welcome. Thanks for making the time to be here. And particularly exciting to do this session because I have a bit of an IT background. We were chatting about it all the way, but it's not about me, it's about you. And it's interesting to have a company like Itron hire someone with your background, and we'll pull that out during the interview. But you know, when we were preparing for this, you said to me when we had our sort of 10-minute conference call that really at a top philosophical level, it's all about the move to delivering outcomes.
Exactly.
Can you add a bit more color to that?
You know, absolutely. I think if we look at the traditional model of software, right, and maybe a bit of an analogy, I think I told you this one before, right? IT is a bit of a goofy space. If the utility industry had grown up in the way that IT had, I'd have a generator in my backyard. I'd be generating my own power. I'd have a well to get my own water. I'd probably have a diesel tank under my yard.
It'd be called an iGenerator.
An iGenerator, thank you. Yeah, and I'd have an app for it. Yeah. And I'd brag to my neighbors about how power generation was a core competency for me, which of course makes no sense at all. But essentially that's kind of how we've gotten with IT, right? And I think a lot of customers are now finally realizing, hey, I need to focus on what I do well, right? And leave the underlying infrastructure to somebody who does that well. And I think this is a natural outgrowth of that, right? So I know we're going to talk about things like security later, but I think it just becomes more important to have people that are experts in their field and allow you to focus on the things you do really well. And for us, it's this vast domain expertise around utilities and around power and water and using those, you know, most efficiently.
And just staying on that notion of delivering outcomes.
Yes.
I know when we were talking, you said, okay, you know, you didn't just come in here and say, hey, we got to deliver outcomes. There was a consultation phase, talking to clients and so on. You know, can you bring some of those outcomes to life?
Yeah.
You know, what do they look like?
Well, let me give you a great example. So I was talking to a CEO of a large industrial-owned utility, or investor-owned utility in the electric space. And one of the issues they have is with location. And I don't mean XY GPS location, I'm talking about electrical location. So if a residence or a business is connected up to the grid, what transformers it on, what substations it on, what phase is it on, they often don't have really good records on that. Now they're not going to update it every week. They're probably going to do it once, twice a year. Why would they want to buy software and hardware and train staff to do that when they could simply get a report? You know, if you look at the water industry, for instance, right? Do you really want to buy a software package that can tell you where the leaks are, or do you simply want a list of where to dig? So that's what our customers have been asking for, right? Don't make us invest in technology, give us solutions to business problems.
So they're saying, I just need to know this.
Yes.
If you can tell me what that is with a great deal of certainty, I will buy that outcome from you.
Correct, exactly right.
Okay. And so a lot has been made, and you know, let's try and build this narrative here about the partnership with Microsoft, with the Azure platform, and so on. How important is that cloud computing layer for you and your team to now start building services that sell outcomes that people buy? I'm using a buy-sell analogy, but
no, I think it's a good analogy. You know, so if you start by saying, why would I move to an outcome? Well, clearly, I want to, as a business, I want to focus on my core competencies. So our customers want to focus on what they're really good at. But in general, the reason that people make changes are they got to get something for it. In this case, we heard three things. We need a faster time to innovation. It needs to be more reliable, higher quality, and kind of implicit in that is more secure. And lastly, it needs to cost less. Well, if you start with those three constraints, you really can't do business as usual. You have to look at a fundamentally different way of developing. So at Itron, we actually had about 96 different customer-facing software products. And I'm embarrassed to say they were probably in at least 5 different computer languages. So you don't have any economies of scale, right? You can't take somebody from one group and just plug them into another group as opportunities with customers, as new businesses present themselves, right? So it was really important to standardize. So then you start looking at, you know, all the different cloud providers, and what we found with Microsoft was they're enterprise grade. And this is a very solid platform, and it's from a very collaborative company.
I mean, the Azure platform also has some very different DNA. You've got HPC, high performance
Right.
capability.
Yeah.
You've got long-term storage capability as well. But how important a factor was the fact that you were standardizing also on .NET? That must have had some influence of.
Absolutely, yeah. And we started with a basis where I would say probably 60 to 70% of our developers were .NET, or at least .NET trained. And so obviously that makes Microsoft kind of a natural choice as well. If we'd wanted to do Linux on Microsoft, we certainly could have. But given the fact that .NET was one of our primary operating platforms, but what you also get is you get plugins to great things like Git. I don't want to get too techie, right?
Yeah.
But a single source code repository. And that's an open source tool, but part of Azure. And the other thing I really like was just the whole ecosystem around training. So there are lots of people that are capable of bringing the training to our people quickly, and our customers understand it as well. So when you start talking about sort of collaborative innovation with your customers, it's a well understood platform.
So you're building this outcome as a service layer.
Yes.
We're going to go to a customer and we're going to say, listen, I know that your major problem is predicting leaks and so on.
Yeah.
We will sell you that information as a service, so
Correct.
you don't have to put in a whole load of people and so on. I'm getting to a point here. I'm not just rambling. So one of the key things as well in there is security, because
Yes.
the more we join our critical infrastructure up to distributed networks, the cloud, and so on, just talk a little bit about security.
Absolutely.
It always seems to me to be something a bit like insurance, right?
Yes.
You don't want it until you need it.
You're exactly right, although I think the view has changed a little bit recently, right? Again, back to my analogy where I was going to put a power plant in my backyard, right? I'm a smart guy. I'm sure I could figure out the regulatory implications, right? I think that was, a lot of enterprises had that view, right? We have very smart people. We can do this. And then Home Depot happened. And then Target happened. And then Neiman Marcus happened. And then emails got hacked and leaked, right? And I think there's a whole new view of the world now, right? And if you're a customer and you're spending millions of dollars a year in security, is it enough? I'd argue that our customers are some of the best, probably in the world at safeguarding their networks. But let's face it, they're not up against high school kids in basements. They're up against nation states, right? And while they may spend millions or even tens of millions on security, Microsoft spends billions on security. And they've got things like the Microsoft Digital Crimes Unit, right, where they actually sleuth hacks and bring law enforcement in to help bring these people to justice. And for us, that was really important, right?
But who's on the hook for security? Is it Itron or is it Microsoft?
Well, it's ultimately us.
Right.
We are taking that responsibility, but we want to make sure that the infrastructure we pick and the partners we choose are up to that task.
So now, what is interesting in moving to this as a service model?
Yes.
You mentioned a number. I think it was like 90 odd different products and so on.
But 96 actually.
So, do you sometimes feel like you're an internal rival to the existing products? You're swapping them out, or is that part of a roadmap? Or
I think when any company goes through a change like this, honestly, it's not a technology problem. It's a change management and a people problem. And so for a people issue, right, you have to really talk through with your organization, hey, what's in it for me? And for an individual employee, your job gets better. You're getting to play with new technology. You're getting to learn new skills that ultimately make you more marketable. For the folks involved with the individual products, we were very conscious about valuing the innovation that those products brought. So we looked through our entire portfolio and we didn't say, hey, we're going to take all of these products and simply port them to the cloud. But we looked at the features that made them really unique, and we roadmapped those features into the cloud. So the folks that were emotionally invested in those platforms, and frankly the customers that had put a lot of effort into helping us build those features, saw that they were going to get those those features as a service in the cloud. And that really helps with both buy-in from your organization and from your customers.
So phase one, we're going to deliver the great products we have on the cloud.
Correct.
Enhanced, and so on. But doesn't the fact that you're standardizing, and it's one of those little known facts when you look at innovation in the Industrial Revolution, right? A big leap of innovation happened when we standardized nuts and bolts, right?
Exactly.
Because before then, everybody was manufacturing their own. If you were to blue sky a little bit, how fast are you looking at getting in terms of using this platform to innovate?
Well, that's a great question. That's really at the heart of why you would do something like this, right? So typical software development schedules, I would say for aggressive companies, they release maybe quarterly. In our industry, it's more common maybe to release once a year, every 6 months. We're actually looking at something that gets us down to 3-week sprints. And the reason you can do that is you can highly automate. And you can afford to take risks. And let me explain that, right? So if you're going
because that's a word this industry doesn't like, right?
Risks, right. Well,
right? Okay, so let's explain that.
And there's a term in IT, and I use it carefully, which is called fail fast. Right. Now, and that doesn't mean that I want to fail. It means I want to learn quickly so I can get better. You know, it's the old, it's the Edison quote. He didn't fail 10,000 times. He just learned 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb. So by building in the cloud, we can highly automate everything. So we're using a tool called Chef, if you've heard of that.
No.
So Chef is an automation tool, and essentially, the old days, if I wanted to build an application, I'd go to HP or Lenovo or IBM, and I'd order some equipment. It'd show up about 12 weeks later, and I'd have some people go out and install it. And 16 weeks or so later, I'd be able to do development, and then I develop that software, and then we go test it somewhere else. And if you'll pardon me, just kind of walking you through this. Yep. Let's say it was developed on version 2.1 of whatever. Well, the person that tested it didn't have 2.1 that day, so they'd test on 4.6. And then the customer would get it and they'd say, well, but we really like 1.0. We think that's the most stable, right? That led to a lot of instability, and it's interesting, depending on whose data you believe, about 80% of bugs are actually configuration issues. So now if we're standardizing where development, test, and deployment are all on the same system, and it's configured automatically with scripts, now I can build a system in minutes. It also means that if I deploy a change that doesn't work, so I have a beta customer and they say, wait, that's not what I wanted, or that's I know you thought you heard what I said, but that's not what I meant. We can very quickly pull that feature back, again, because we're not patching a system on a customer's location, modify it, and then push it out again. And literally that could be in hours. So we've really changed the time it takes for a customer to say, I think I want a feature that looks like this, until they actually see it working. And that's what you get from that standardization.
So how big of a shift in thinking is this for your customers?
It's a big change. There's no question.
And how do you deal with that?
Well, so there's two problems. The first is we can't possibly absorb a change a day, right? And certainly if you take this to the extreme, there are companies, Amazon, for instance, says they push out about 20,000 changes a day. Now, I suspect they're talking about the icon color at that point, right? So we'll still bundle those up in releases, and we'll still give customers a cloud-based test environment, so they don't need to go buy their own equipment to do test, to really play with it and make sure that it meets their needs, and actually gives them a longer feedback period if it doesn't work. But then we'll actually push those changes to production on a very regular pattern. So we can make it look like exactly what they had before. The great thing is you're not amassing technical debt. In other words, that period from when I have an idea until the time I see it actually working is vastly shrunk. So I can actually see, did that meet the need I was looking for? The second one that's a little trickier is actually regulatory, right? So in a lot of cases, our customers are incented to actually deploy more capital, and they get a rate of return on that. So in parallel, we're working very closely with state, federal, and local regulators to say, hey, if we can build a solution that's ultimately less expensive, and by definition then less expensive for the ratepayer, can we look at different ways for how we evaluate those investments?
And just on that side, because it's another thing. We have it in Europe as well. Where when I talk to utilities, they say, well, we're innovating as fast as regulation lets us.
Right.
Not necessarily as fast as we can. But again, I just want to stress a little bit more that the move to a DevOps model, because I did find it fascinating. Where for a long time, commentating on these industries, you're talking about much longer life cycles.
Right.
You're sat up here now talking about weeks.
Yes.
Right. And you're also talking about risk and fail fast and words that
scary words sometimes.
So can we just stress test the notion a little bit?
Yes.
Is it because the services that you're delivering are sort of more information based, like where's the leak and so on, rather than actually the part of the running of the infrastructure? Is that what allows you to do that?
That's exactly right. So in essence, right, in a normal relationship where I was selling a customer software, and they were loading it, they assume all the risk. And by the way, they assume all the cost up front too. We're really shifting all the risk now back to us, right? So the customer is simply buying an outcome. They're buying a piece of information that's actionable. I'm providing that under an SLA, and it's now my risk to make sure that it meets their SLAs. And I wanted to, we keep using the word DevOps, but here's what's in it for the customer in DevOps. So DevOps, hard as it seems, it's actually just development plus operations. But if you double click on that, it means that the same person that writes the code is responsible for testing it. And the same person that is testing it is responsible for taking a phone call from a customer if there's a problem. It really changes the whole mindset of how you code. So you don't code for elegance. You don't try to be clever. You try to be reliable. You don't want to get the call at 2 in the morning. And it really leads to a much better work product at the end of the day for our customers.
So again, sort of as we're coming to the end of the time here, but let me rewind a little bit,
yes.
Because before I started commentating on this industry, I was working in the IT space,
right.
And I was in that storm in the IT space of, oh no, the cloud is scary and it'll never work,
right.
To the cloud is actually here, how do I get my head around it? And one of the biggest conversations that was happening at the time was, how do we reskill procurement to move into this world, because now it's about SLAs and it's a whole different procurement model.
It is a much different procurement model.
Is that the same thing that's happening?
Yeah.
I mean, it's deja vu for me, but is that the same thing that's happening here?
No question. I think our internal stakeholders and our customers, they get it. They understand the value. I think it's incumbent on us to help educate other parts of the business, including IT. Because IT, this is a shift, and clearly for procurement, it's a very different way of looking at a business transaction. But again, if you think about how IT has worked for the last 40 years, right? You have an initiative, you have to go spend money on servers, you have to go spend money on software, you have to hire a lot of skilled people, and then you have some multi-month development cycle. You, as the end user, as the customer, are taking all the business risk up front, and it's incumbent on you to show economic value at the end. We're really turning that whole relationship on its head, which the CFO likes a lot, because now you're really only paying for the service or for the outcome at the point where you derive business value. And I think that's what really resonates for the finance organization and for the business users and our customers.
And isn't there also another thing? Is like, look, this needs really skilled developers. Mm-hmm. And then if you're just one company, you hire a skilled developer, and you know what these guys are like. They get to the end of the project and they're bored and they leave. Right. So, but in this instance, you're then able to give them other projects, so you have less churn and things like that.
Exactly right. We can build greater domain expertise, and really that speaks to why we picked Azure as well, right? Because let's face it, Microsoft is an exciting place to work for a lot of developers, and so they're going to get the best security minds. They're going to get a lot of innovation, and they're going to put together building blocks. For instance, like an analytics platform. So all the mechanics for how you do complex analytics are in place. We can just layer our domain expertise on top of that, and it's back to a much faster time to market.
And are Microsoft getting involved in development side with this as well, or is it just a pure?
It's one of the other reasons we picked Microsoft is they've been really collaborative in terms of actually letting our engineers go to Redmond, sit down with their development teams, and kind of brainstorm about future pieces of the Azure product.
And just to really finish off,
because
otherwise we'll go meandering off in a different direction.
I have as much time as you'd like.
Well, I think these folk might get bored though. But where do you want to take this? You personally, coming from HP, what you've seen is just like your personal journey here. Have you had to sort of change cultures and get people to understand the way this works?
I have. So I start with the mantra that I'm making a personal guarantee to my employees and to my customers that cloud will always be cheaper and cloud will always be more secure. So we start with that. We've got the best interest of the shareholders at heart. We've got the best interest of our customers at heart. We've got the best interest of their shareholders at heart. And I've given my team the goal that when a customer says, hey, I'd really like to see this new feature, that I can actually have it working before they can complete the contract negotiation. That's the desired end state.
Have you been able to do that yet?
You believe it or not, I have. So we had a water customer in California that wanted a fraud detection software, and we had the feature working before the contract was complete. That's the pace of innovation we want to see.
And that's a great place to leave it. Greg, thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you. And thank you as well for watching.